please stop. I know the interview was difficult, but I just reviewed your file. We need someone like you here. This is a second chance if you want it.
He walked out of the glass-walled boardroom with absolutely nothing left to lose, his daughter's eviction notice burning a hole in his pocket. He thought the interview was a catastrophic failure that would leave them homeless. He was wrong. Because 3 minutes later, the city's most elusive billionaire was sprinting down the pavement, desperately screaming his name. The rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the nebulizer was the only sound in the cramped Capitol Hill apartment. Arthur Caldwell sat on the edge of the twin bed, holding the plastic mask gently over his 7-year-old daughter's face. Maya's eyes, a striking hazel that mirrored his late wife's, were half closed in a sleepy haze. It was 6 a.m. in Seattle, and the relentless Pacific Northwest rain was already lashing against the single-pane window. "Deep breaths, sweetheart," Arthur murmured, checking his watch. It was a scuffed Timex, the leather strap frayed from years of wear. He had exactly 2 hours before the most important interview of his life, and his chest felt entirely hollowed out. Arthur was 34, but the deep lines etched around his eyes made him look 10 years older. For the past 18 months, his life had been a masterclass in freefall. After blowing the whistle on his former employer, a massive freight forwarding conglomerate that had been systematically falsifying hazmat manifests to bypass state environmental regulations, Arthur hadn't been hailed as a hero. He had been quietly blacklisted. The industry in the Pacific Northwest was a tight-knit club. When you crossed one giant, the others closed their doors. Consequently, the Caldwell's savings had evaporated into the sterile corridors of Swedish Medical Center to cover Maya's severe chronic asthma treatments, and the crushing debt left behind by his wife's brief, fatal battle with ovarian cancer. Now, Arthur was 2 months behind on rent. He had $34 in his checking account. If he didn't secure this position today, he and Maya would be living out of his 2012 Honda Civic by the end of the week. "Dad?" Maya's small voice pulled him from the abyss of his thoughts. The nebulizer treatment had finished. "Are you going to get the job today?" Arthur offered a smile that required every ounce of his willpower to construct. He smoothed down her unruly brown curls. "I'm going to give it my best shot, kiddo. Mrs. Gable from downstairs is going to walk you to school, okay? And when I pick you up, maybe we'll celebrate with some Dick's Drive-In." A faint smile touched Maya's lips before she nodded, exhausted. 30 minutes later, Arthur stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, adjusting the navy tie of his only suit. It was a classic Brooks Brothers piece, purchased a lifetime ago when he was a rising star in supply chain analytics. Now, it hung slightly loose on his frame, a silent testament to the meals he had skipped to ensure Maya had fresh produce. He carefully placed a worn, red moleskin notebook into his leather briefcase. Inside that notebook were months of his independent research, intricate predictive heuristic models designed to solve complex global shipping bottlenecks. It was his life's work, scribbled between hospital visits and late-night panic attacks. The commute downtown on the Link light rail was a blur of gray skies and damp coats. Arthur clutched his briefcase to his chest, rehearsing his answers. The destination was Holt Global, a multi-billion-dollar logistics and technology empire headquartered in a towering monolith of glass and steel on 4th Avenue. Getting the interview had been a fluke. An automated resume screening system had likely bypassed the industry blacklist, flagging his exceptional proficiency in cross-docking algorithms. Stepping into the lobby of Holt Global was like stepping into a cathedral of modern commerce. Italian marble floors reflected the sleek, minimalist lighting. Men in bespoke Tom Ford suits and women in sharp Armani blazers moved with absolute purpose. Arthur approached the reception desk, acutely aware of the slightly frayed cuffs of his shirt. "Arthur Caldwell," he told the receptionist, trying to keep his voice steady. "Here for the senior logistics architect interview at 9. He was handed a heavy, metallic visitor's badge and directed to the 42nd floor. The elevator ride was silent, ascending with a smooth, stomach-dropping speed. As the doors parted, Arthur stepped onto a floor, humming with aggressive corporate energy. He was escorted into a massive, glass-walled boardroom overlooking the Puget Sound. The view was breathtaking, but Arthur barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the 3 people sitting on the opposite side of a long mahogany table. His future was sitting entirely in their hands. The panel consisted of 2 men and 1 woman. The man in the center, who introduced himself as Richard Sterling, vice president of talent acquisition, had the polished, predatory smile of a seasoned corporate shark. To his left sat a younger man, aggressively typing on a sleek laptop. To Richard's right sat a woman who had yet to introduce herself. She was entirely unassuming compared to Richard's booming presence. Dressed in a simple, unstructured black blazer over a white silk blouse, she appeared to be in her late 30s. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe clasp, and her piercing gray eyes studied Arthur with an unreadable, quiet intensity. A silver Patek Philippe Calatrava rested quietly on her left wrist, the only subtle indicator of profound wealth in the room. Arthur assumed she was an auditor, or perhaps a silent partner observing the HR processes. "Mr. Caldwell," Richard began, steepling his fingers. He didn't offer a handshake. "Your technical test scores were adequate. However, I'm looking at your employment history. You were a fast tracker at Apex Freight, and then a sudden 18-month gap. You've been working as a night shift forklift operator at a local warehouse since. Why the sudden fall from grace?" Arthur felt a hot spike of anxiety, but he kept his posture perfectly straight. "I chose to leave Apex Freight due to fundamental disagreements regarding compliance and ethical protocols. Since then, I've prioritized my daughter's health while taking transitional work to make ends meet." Richard let out a dry, patronizing chuckle. "Ah, yes, the whistleblowing incident. We read the industry blogs, Arthur. You cost Apex nearly $40 million in fines because you couldn't look the other way on a few missing signatures." "They weren't missing signatures, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, solidifying with conviction. "They were falsified documents, masking the illegal dumping of caustic solvents near a municipal water supply. Looking the other way wasn't an option." The young man on the laptop scoffed quietly. The woman at the end of the table remained perfectly still, her eyes locked onto Arthur's face, tracking every micro-expression. "Here at Holt Global," Richard leaned forward, his tone turning frosty, "we value loyalty above all else. We manage supply chains that keep entire countries functioning. If a shipment of consumer electronics is delayed at the port of Rotterdam, it costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour. So, let me give you a hypothetical, Mr. Caldwell." Richard outlined a complex scenario involving a stalled container ship, a looming union strike, and a strict delivery deadline for a key client. He presented a solution that involved quietly bypassing standard safety inspections to expedite the offloading process, maximizing profit but putting the dock workers at severe physical risk. "Do you authorize the bypass?" Richard asked, his eyes gleaming with a trap waiting to be sprung. "Do you secure the 2% margin increase for the shareholders?" Arthur stared at the mahogany table. He thought of Maya. He thought of the eviction notice in his pocket. He thought of the $90,000 base salary that would save his life. All he had to do was say yes. All he had to do was play the corporate game, stroke Richard's ego, and pretend that human lives were just acceptable collateral in the grand ledger of global commerce. Arthur slowly reached into his briefcase and pulled out his red moleskin notebook. He opened it, looking down at a page. On the left side was a complex mathematical formula he had written for port efficiency. On the right side, scribbled in bright pink crayon, was a drawing Maya had done of the two of them holding hands under a smiling sun. Arthur closed the notebook. He looked directly into Richard's eyes. "No," Arthur said, his voice ringing with absolute clarity in the quiet room. "I don't bypass the safety inspections. A 2% margin increase does not justify a 30% increase in casualty probability. Furthermore, your hypothetical model is fundamentally flawed. If you reroute the secondary LTL shipments through Antwerp using a predictive heuristic model, you absorb the delay cost without bypassing a single safety protocol. You don't need to put lives at risk to make a profit. You just have to be smarter than the bottleneck." Silence hung heavily in the boardroom. Richard's face flushed a deep, ugly red. His authority had been directly challenged, and worse, he had been called stupid in his own boardroom. "We need sharks, Mr. Caldwell," Richard spat, slamming his portfolio shut. "Not Boy Scouts, and we certainly don't need blacklisted liabilities lecturing us on logistics. This interview is over. I suggest you get back to your forklift." Arthur felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The reality of what had just happened crashed into him like a physical blow. He had failed. He had defended his pride, and in doing so, he had doomed his daughter. "Thank you for your time," Arthur managed to choke out. His hands were shaking as he shoved his papers back into his briefcase. In his blind haste and surging panic, his red moleskin notebook slipped from his grasp, sliding across the polished mahogany table and coming to a rest near the silent woman's elbow. Arthur didn't even notice. He snapped the briefcase shut, turned on his heel, and walked out of the glass doors. The heavy thud of the boardroom door closing felt like a nail in his coffin. Inside the room, Richard was already laughing dismissively. "Can you believe the nerve of that guy? Blacklisted and broke, and he still thinks he can dictate policy." The silent woman did not laugh. Slowly, Jacqueline Holt, the billionaire founder and CEO of Holt Global, reached out and picked up the battered red notebook. She hadn't spoken a word during the interview. She rarely did during the random audits she performed on her executive hiring teams. She preferred to watch. She preferred to see how her executives treated people who possessed no power. Jacqueline flipped the notebook open. She bypassed the pink crayon drawings and stared at the pages and pages of densely packed logistical algorithms. Her breath hitched in her throat. For 6 months, Holt Global's European division had been bleeding millions due to a catastrophic cross-docking failure in their Antwerp to Berlin route. The greatest logistical minds in the world, people earning 7 figures, hadn't been able to solve it. Jacqueline traced the ink on Arthur's page. Here it was, the exact solution. An elegant, flawlessly executed predictive algorithm that factored in demurrage charges, localized weather patterns, and union shift changes. It was pure, unadulterated genius. And right beneath the formula, written in Arthur's neat handwriting, was a personal note. "Efficiency without ethics is just elegant theft. Keep the drivers safe." Jacqueline looked up, her gray eyes narrowing as they fixed on Richard, who was still smirking. "Richard." Jacqueline's voice was quiet, but it possessed a razor-sharp edge that instantly froze the room. "Yes, Miss Holt?" Richard stammered, the color draining from his face as he realized the CEO was directly addressing him. "Clear out your desk," she said coldly, standing up and grabbing the notebook. "You're fired." Before Richard could even process the words, Jacqueline was moving. She threw the boardroom door open, bypassing her stunned security detail waiting in the hallway. "Where did he go?" she snapped at the receptionist. "He just got in the express elevator, Miss Holt. He's heading to the street." Jacqueline didn't wait. She bolted for the executive elevator, slamming her palm against the call button. The man was a ghost, a blacklisted genius walking out her doors, and she had exactly 2 minutes to stop him before the city swallowed him whole. Down on the street, the Seattle rain was coming down in sheets. Arthur pushed his way through the heavy revolving doors of the Holt building, the cold dampness immediately soaking into his thin suit. He stood on the sidewalk of 4th Avenue, staring blankly at the traffic, paralyzed by the sheer terror of his failure. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing the crumpled eviction notice. Tears mixed with the rain on his cheeks. He had to go home and tell Maya that they had to pack. "Mr. Caldwell." Arthur didn't hear it over the roar of a passing King County Metro bus. He stepped toward the crosswalk, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. "Arthur, stop." He turned. Bursting through the revolving doors, completely ignoring the torrential rain ruining her expensive silk blouse, was the quiet woman from the boardroom. She was sprinting down the slick pavement, dodging startled pedestrians, clutching his red notebook desperately to her chest. Jacqueline Holt stopped 3 feet away from him, chest heaving, rain plastering her dark hair to her face. She held out the notebook. "You left this," she panted, her piercing gray eyes locking onto his. "And you are not going back to a forklift. We need to talk." The rain on 4th Avenue was unyielding, soaking through Arthur's thin suit jacket in seconds. He stood frozen on the pavement, staring at the drenched woman holding his red moleskin notebook like it was a holy relic. The sheer absurdity of the situation temporarily short-circuited his panic. "I don't understand," Arthur yelled over the roar of traffic. "Who are you?" She stepped closer, the icy wind whipping her dark hair around her face. "My name is Jacqueline Holt. I'm the CEO of Holt Global, and I just fired the man who insulted you in my boardroom." Arthur blinked, the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes. The quiet woman, the auditor. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He had just lectured the billionaire founder of a global empire on logistics and ethics, entirely unprompted. "Mr. Caldwell," Jacqueline continued, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the city with practiced authority. I need exactly 20 minutes of your time. If you walk away now, you are walking away from the solution to every problem you currently have. Please? Arthur hesitated. He thought of his empty bank account and the eviction notice. But more pressingly, he thought of the time. I can't. I have to be at my daughter's elementary school in exactly 45 minutes. She has severe asthma, and I cannot be late. Jacqueline didn't miss a beat. She raised a hand, and a sleek, black-armored Lincoln Navigator that had been idling discreetly down the block instantly pulled up to the curb, tires splashing through the puddles. Get in, she said, opening the heavy door. My driver, Thomas, will take us to the school. We can talk on the way, and I will arrange for a private pediatric specialist to meet us wherever you'd like afterward. The interior of the Lincoln was a silent, climate-controlled sanctuary smelling of rich leather and ozone. Arthur sank into the heated seat, his mind reeling as Jacqueline instructed the driver. Once they merged into the heavy Seattle traffic, she turned to him, flicking on a small reading light. She opened the damp red notebook. Page 42, Jacqueline said, her gray eyes locking onto his. The Antwerp to Berlin cross-docking matrix. You didn't just doodle this, Arthur. This is a fully realized predictive heuristic model. Where did you get the raw data to build this? Arthur swallowed hard, his defensive instincts flaring. It's public maritime data cross-referenced with regional European weather patterns and local labor union contract expirations. It's not a secret. It's just that nobody bothers to aggregate it because they rely on outdated, static routing software. Jacqueline stared at him, a profound mix of disbelief and vindication washing over her face. For 6 months, Holt Global has bled $14 million trying to fix a bottleneck in that exact route. We hired an entire firm of Ivy League analysts who told me it was an unsolvable geopolitical delay. And you solved it in a notebook with a pink crayon drawing of a sun next to it. I had a lot of downtime on the night shift, Arthur muttered, suddenly feeling very self-conscious. The math is sound, but it requires sacrificing a slight margin on the front end to pay for a secondary staging facility in Brussels. Most executives won't authorize the upfront cost. Richard Sterling wouldn't, Jacqueline corrected, her tone turning glacial. Which is exactly why Holt Global is rotting from the inside out. I built this company on efficiency and integrity. Over the last 5 years, as we went public, the board of directors has flooded my executive suites with Wall Street vultures who care only about quarterly margins, even if it means breaking the law or breaking our workers. She closed the notebook and handed it back to him. I know who you are, Arthur Caldwell. I know you blew the whistle on Apex Freight. I know the industry blacklisted you because you cost them money by doing the right thing. But I am not the industry. I am Jacqueline Holt, and I am offering you the position of Executive Vice President of Global Strategy. Your starting salary will be $600,000 a year with full comprehensive medical for your daughter, effective the second you say yes. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. He stared at the billionaire, searching her face for a punchline, for the hidden trap. Why? You don't know me. I'm a liability. Because you have something I desperately need, Jacqueline said softly, the corporate armor slipping just enough to reveal a deep, simmering exhaustion. You have a spine. I am surrounded by yes-men and sharks who are actively trying to steal my company from me. I need someone who isn't afraid to look a vice president in the eye and say, no. I need you to fix my routing, yes. But more importantly, I need you to help me clean house. The Lincoln pulled up to the curb of Maya's school. Arthur looked out the tinted window at the brick building, then back at Jacqueline. The eviction notice in his pocket suddenly felt completely weightless. Where do we start? Arthur asked. 30 days later, Arthur Caldwell's life was entirely unrecognizable. He sat at a sprawling mahogany desk in a corner office on the 42nd floor of Holt Global, overlooking a sun-drenched Puget Sound. Maya was currently in the private Holt corporate daycare 3 floors down, breathing easier than she had in years thanks to the cutting-edge immunotherapy treatments orchestrated by Jacqueline's concierge medical team. Arthur wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit his broadened shoulders perfectly. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, replaced by the sharp, focused intensity of a man who had been given a second lease on life. But within the walls of Holt Global, a silent war was raging. Arthur's predictive algorithms had been integrated into the European division, instantly clearing the Antwerp bottleneck and saving the company nearly $5 million in 3 weeks. While Jacqueline was thrilled, the old guard was terrified. Arthur was systematically auditing every single logistics route, exposing millions of dollars in kickbacks, shadow margins, and deliberate safety violations authorized by the executive team. He was bad for their business, and they were not going to go down without a fight. The architect of the resistance was Benjamin Hayes, the chairman of the board. Hayes was a 60-year-old titan of private equity with cold, dead eyes and a vast network of political leverage. He despised Jacqueline's ethical framework and had been quietly gathering the board votes needed to remove her as CEO under the clause of fiduciary negligence. Arthur's rapid rise and aggressive audits had accelerated Hayes' timeline. At 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, Arthur's office phone rang. It was Jacqueline. "Arthur, get to the executive boardroom immediately. Hayes just called an emergency, unscheduled board meeting. He bypassed my office entirely." Her voice was tight, betraying a rare thread of panic. "It's an ambush." Arthur grabbed his tablet and sprinted down the hallway. When he pushed through the heavy glass doors of the boardroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. 10 board members sat around the massive table. Jacqueline stood at the head, her posture rigid, her jaw clenched. Benjamin Hayes sat casually to her right, a sickeningly confident smile playing on his lips. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell, so glad you could join us," Hayes purred, gesturing to an empty leather chair. "Please, take a seat. We were just discussing your spectacular failure." Arthur sat down slowly, catching Jacqueline's eye. She gave a microscopic shake of her head. Hayes stood up, pressing a button on a remote. The massive wall screen illuminated, displaying a live satellite feed of a massive Holt Global cargo ship anchored dead in the water off the coast of Singapore. "This," Hayes announced, his voice echoing in the silent room, "is the Holt Vanguard. It is currently carrying $200 million worth of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals bound for Jakarta. And as of 4 hours ago, its entire refrigeration system failed, and the ship has been locked out of the port due to a sudden customs discrepancy generated by our automated routing software. The very software designed by our newly appointed, thoroughly unvetted Executive Vice President, Arthur Caldwell." Murmurs of shock and anger rippled through the board members. "If that cargo spoils," Hayes continued, his voice rising in manufactured outrage, "we are liable for $250 million. The stock will plummet by morning. This is the direct result of Miss Holt hiring a disgraced, blacklisted whistleblower and handing him the keys to our global infrastructure. It is gross negligence. And it is why, as chairman, I am officially calling for a vote of no confidence in Jacqueline Holt and the immediate termination of Arthur Caldwell." Jacqueline slammed her hands onto the table. "Benjamin, this is a setup, and you know it. The algorithm doesn't fail like this. It requires physical overrides at the port level to generate a customs discrepancy. The data says otherwise, Jacqueline," Hayes sneered. "Your pet project cost us a fortune. You let your bleeding heart run a Fortune 500 company, and now we are all going to pay for it." The board members began to nod. The trap was perfectly sprung. Hayes had engineered a crisis so massive and so public that Jacqueline couldn't protect Arthur without going down with him. Mr. Caldwell, one of the board members, a harsh-looking woman named Margaret, snapped, "Do you have anything to say for yourself before we call security to escort you out?" Arthur didn't panic. He didn't sweat. He simply looked at the satellite image of the ship, then looked directly at Benjamin Hayes. "May I connect my tablet to the mainframe?" Arthur asked, his voice calm and completely devoid of fear. Hayes waved a hand dismissively. "By all means, Arthur. Let's see you code your way out of a $250 million breach." Arthur plugged his tablet into the table's docking station. The satellite feed of the ship vanished, replaced by lines of complex, glowing code and a sprawling digital ledger. "You're right, Mr. Hayes," Arthur began, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "The Holt Vanguard is stalled. But my algorithm didn't fail. In fact, it worked perfectly. It did exactly what it was designed to do. It detected an anomaly." Arthur tapped the screen. A series of encrypted emails and offshore bank transfer receipts suddenly flooded the monitor. "When I rebuilt the routing architecture," Arthur explained, pacing slowly behind his chair, "I didn't just build it to optimize speed. I built it to trace human interference. 3 days ago, A manual override was inputted into the Singapore port registry, intentionally flagging our ship for a customs hold. Simultaneously, the ship's internal telemetry was remotely hacked to shut down the refrigeration units. The color began to drain from Benjamin Hayes's face. He sat up straighter. "What is this nonsense? Are you accusing someone of industrial sabotage?" "I'm not accusing anyone," Arthur said softly, his eyes locking onto Hayes with the intensity of a predator. "The math is accusing you, Benjamin. The IP address that authorized the manual override came directly from a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A shell company that, according to these digital ledgers I pulled by cross-referencing your private equity firm's public filings, is wholly owned by you." The boardroom erupted into total chaos. Margaret gasped, slamming her hand over her mouth. Jacqueline's eyes widened, a fierce, triumphant light igniting in the gray depths. "That is a fabrication," Hayes roared, slamming his fist on the table, a vein bulging in his forehead. "This is slander. I'll sue you into the ground, Caldwell." "Sue me?" Arthur countered, his voice rising over the din, commanding the room. "Benjamin, you deliberately sabotaged a shipment of life-saving medical supplies just to manipulate stock prices and win a boardroom argument. You didn't just breach your fiduciary duty, you committed international wire fraud and maritime sabotage." Arthur tapped his tablet one final time. "Which is why, 20 minutes ago, while you were busy gloating, I bypassed the board and forwarded the entire encrypted data packet directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the FBI, as well as the SEC. Oh, and the Holt Vanguard? I rerouted a secondary maintenance vessel to them yesterday when the algorithm first flagged your proxy server. The refrigeration was fixed 3 hours ago. The cargo is perfectly safe." Silence slammed back into the boardroom, heavy and absolute. Benjamin Hayes opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and was waiting for the click. Jacqueline Holt stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her blazer, her face a mask of absolute, devastating control. She looked at the terrified board members, then down at Hayes. "Benjamin," Jacqueline said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "I suggest you take your things. The authorities will be waiting for you in the lobby." The glass doors of the executive boardroom slid open, and 2 agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped inside, their presence instantly draining whatever oxygen remained in the room. Benjamin Hayes did not put up a fight. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a hollowed-out shell of the predatory titan he had been just 5 minutes prior. As the agents escorted him out, the metallic click of handcuffs echoed off the Italian marble floors. Silence descended upon the remaining board members. Margaret, the woman who had demanded Arthur's termination moments earlier, nervously adjusted her silk scarf. She offered Jacqueline a tight, fragile smile. "Well, Jacqueline," Margaret stammered, her voice trembling, "it appears Mr. Caldwell has done us all a great service. We had no idea Benjamin was capable of such profound deception." Jacqueline remained standing at the head of the table. She did not smile back. "Margaret, my legal team has already drafted the severances. Anyone who voted in favor of Hayes's unscheduled motion today is in direct violation of the company's fiduciary ethics clause. You have 1 hour to clear out your offices. Security will escort you to the lobby." Within an hour, the 42nd floor of Holt Global was purged of its toxic old guard. Back in the quiet sanctuary of the CEO's office, the adrenaline of the coup began to fade, replaced by a heavy, profound exhaustion. Jacqueline poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, handing one to Arthur, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the Seattle rain finally break, giving way to a piercing sunset over the Puget Sound. "You saved my company today, Arthur," Jacqueline said quietly, sitting on the edge of her massive mahogany desk. "But you took a massive risk pulling those offshore banking records. If Hayes had better firewalls, he could have trapped you in a corporate espionage charge." Arthur turned around, his expression serious. He set his glass down and picked up his tablet. "I didn't take a risk, Jacqueline. I had the decryption keys to his shell company's proxy servers because I recognized the coding architecture. I've seen it before." Jacqueline frowned, her sharp gray eyes narrowing. "Where?" 18 months ago, Arthur replied, tapping the screen and sliding the tablet across the desk to her. "When I was auditing the hazmat manifests at Apex Freight, Benjamin Hayes wasn't acting alone today. He didn't just want to tank Holt Global's stock to get you fired. He He wanted to drive the valuation down so a competitor could initiate a hostile takeover at pennies on the dollar. Jacqueline looked at the screen. Displayed was a secondary ledger of wire transfers. The funds funneling into Hayes's offshore accounts weren't just from his private equity firm. They were being routed through a subsidiary owned entirely by Harrison Trent, the ruthless CEO of Apex Freight, the very man who had blacklisted Arthur and ruined his life. Apex Freight, Jacqueline breathed, the realization clicking into place. They are suffocating under the environmental fines you triggered when you blew the whistle. Their infrastructure is crumbling. They needed our logistics network to survive, so they paid my chairman to sabotage my fleet and hand them the keys. Arthur nodded. They tried to bury me for telling the truth. Now, they are trying to bury you to steal your legacy. Jacqueline stood up, walking over to the window to stand beside him. The corporate armor she wore so perfectly seemed to melt away, leaving only a razor-sharp, calculating brilliance. She looked out over the city she had helped build. Arthur, she asked, her voice dangerously calm, how much of Apex Freight's proprietary routing network do you still understand? Every single flaw, bottleneck, and vulnerability, Arthur replied without hesitation. Jacqueline turned to him, a fierce smile finally breaking across her face. Then, we don't just survive this, we go to war. Over the next 6 months, the logistics industry witnessed a corporate dismantling of unprecedented scale. Arthur Caldwell was promoted to Chief Operating Officer of Holt Global. With Jacqueline's billions backing him, Arthur executed what the financial press dubbed the Apex Protocol. He systematically dismantled his former employer through entirely legal, utterly devastating market strategies. Asterisk route undercutting. Using his advanced predictive heuristic models, Arthur outbid Apex Freight on their 3 most profitable trans-Pacific routes, absorbing a temporary loss that Holt Global could weather, but Apex could not. Asterisk talent acquisition. Arthur aggressively recruited Apex's top-tier, disgruntled warehouse managers and drivers, offering them 20% pay increases and comprehensive health care, stripping Apex of its vital workforce. Asterisk regulatory exposure. Arthur legally handed over the remaining decrypted evidence of Harrison Trent's wire fraud and ongoing environmental cover-ups to the Environmental Protection Agency and the SEC. The resulting fallout was catastrophic for Apex. Their stock plummeted by 70%. Facing federal indictment and total bankruptcy, the Apex board ousted Harrison Trent in disgrace. 2 weeks later, Holt Global acquired the crippled remnants of Apex Freight in a buyout that cost Jacqueline a fraction of its former value. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Arthur Caldwell walked through the glass doors of the Apex Freight headquarters. He wasn't wearing a frayed suit, and he didn't have an eviction notice in his pocket. He was flanked by Holt Global's legal team, arriving to officially sign the restructuring documents. He walked past the very executives who had laughed at him 18 months prior, their faces pale with shock, as they realized the man they had thrown to the wolves now owned the pack. 1 year later, the mechanical hiss of the nebulizer was a distant, faded memory. The Caldwells' cramped Capitol Hill apartment had been replaced by a sprawling, light-filled mid-century home on Mercer Island, surrounded by old-growth pine trees and overlooking the water. It was a Saturday afternoon. In the lush backyard, Maya, now 8 years old and brimming with vibrant, healthy energy, was chasing a golden retriever puppy across the manicured grass. Her asthma was completely managed, a testament to the world-class specialists Jacqueline had brought into their lives. Arthur stood on the cedar deck, flipping burgers on a massive stainless steel grill. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking a decade younger than the terrified father who had walked into that fateful interview. The sliding glass door opened, and Jacqueline stepped out onto the deck. She was dressed down in a cashmere sweater and dark denim, holding a bowl of potato salad. She wasn't just his billionaire boss anymore. She had become family. The quarterly reports just came in. Jacqueline mentioned casually, stealing a piece of celery from a tray. The European division is up 30%. The board wants to throw a gala. Tell them I'm busy, Arthur smiled, watching Maya tackle the puppy in a fit of giggles. I have a third-grade science fair to prepare for on Monday. Priorities, Jacqueline. Jacqueline laughed, a genuine, warm sound that felt perfectly at home in the crisp Seattle air. She looked at the man who had walked into her boardroom with nothing but a notebook and a profound sense of integrity. and she knew that the greatest investment she had ever made wasn't in software or ships or global infrastructure. It was in him. Arthur Caldwell once walked into Holt Global with nothing but a frayed suit and a desperate hope to save his daughter. He walked out possessing the keys to an empire. Sometimes, the darkest moments of professional failure are simply the necessary precursors to unimaginable success. When uncompromising ethics meet opportunity, the universe realigns. He didn't just find a job that rainy morning, he found a home, a legacy, and vindication.
Hi, my name is Shalom Royal Hunger, the owner and manager of Shalom Royal Hunger. After watching the video, Single Dad failed the interview and walked away. Minutes later, Billionaire CEO ran after him. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the emotional mix of disappointment and unexpected recognition. You could really feel the weight of rejection when the single dad walked away believing the opportunity was gone, especially knowing he was likely carrying responsibilities far bigger than himself. That's what made the CEO running after him feel so meaningful. Sometimes people's true value isn't obvious in the first few moments, but character and quiet determination eventually stand out. Do you think the CEO realized she judged him too quickly? Or did she see something in him that nobody else noticed? And have you ever experienced a moment where something that felt like failure suddenly turned into a new opportunity? I think stories like this remind us not to give up too early, and not to underestimate people based on appearances or difficult circumstances. If this story connected with you emotionally, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories about resilience, family, and unexpected second chances, feel free to like and subscribe, only if you'd like to see more.